All right, here we go. Hidden Hustle. Greg and Jamie back with you on our Sports Daily's YouTube channel. Special occasion, obviously. Preston Zinter, linebacker, 6'3", 220, out of Massachusetts, who just committed to Notre Dame. Not something that was a surprise. It was kind of like Notre Dame seemed like it was in a good position before. He recently visited for the junior day. It seemed like everything was strengthening there. And then kind of as soon as he announced, it was like pretty obvious that was going to happen. I'm a big fan of this kid. I really like him a lot. What do you think about his game, Greg?
So I guess my first impression of him and just like taking in him as a player when I first saw him was how long he is. Really long players, like seem like really long arms, really long legs, long stride. And I had told you kind of offline when we were kind of talking about him. When he committed, when he kind of made the announcement, and we everyone kind of thought like, okay, this is trending in a Notre Dame's way. We were kind of talking about him, and I thought I compared him to, I guess, Rocky Boyman, and I said the same thing to Christian. And they're not the reason I say this because the physical dimensions, right? Like I remember Boyman was like a very long player, like long strider. There were those moments where like he's like a really good athlete, right? So he was chasing down like in the 2000 game. There's a famous kind of couple plays where Rocky Boyman's like chasing down Eric Crouch, right? And Eric Crouch was, basically known as a sprinter and ran
Yeah,
for
4 or 5 guy, like
right,
super
and
fast. Yeah,
Rocky Boyman's running him down in the backfield, right? And I think that so Zinner is similar in that where he has the long speed, right? Like you get him going, and you see it when he plays offense too. Like he plays a little bit wide receiver for his high school, and you can see there where like he gets the ball, and once he starts going, like people are like in a real bad way. Like you can't close an angle on him. Once he gets that stride going. So like fast, but not like totally like twitchy or something like that. Not so like not twitchy like someone like JOK
yeah.
or Snead or something like that, but still like a really good athlete, and you can tell. And I don't know how you feel about this. I don't know that we've ever talked about, the concept of a player playing both ways like Zinner does, right? Like so he's not a a wide receiver prospect, but he plays wide receiver. And
Yeah,
I always like that because
I love it. I've always been a big two.
yeah,
I'm a big
because
two-way guy. I think it matters.
it kind of
It's
shows
it's it's a little bit like multi-sport guy. It's guys
yeah.
showing different, learning different athletic traits, like different movements and stuff, and that helps you become a better player, right? So, and I just think it's a bad idea for. I think it just in general. I think most people will tell you kids don't specialize too early, whatever, and definitely for football players, whatever. But don't just play football, play other sports, track, basketball, whatever. But I think it's really important too that especially for if like I like when I see linebackers, I like when I see them they're like receivers.
Yeah.
So I'm like that guy can run because he can run. He's fluid, right? He can
Mhm.
move. You can see hip movement and stuff like that. And that's kind of one of the things where you see him line up more as an edge guy, and we'll get into that. But like I see some of that movement and ball skills and stuff like that, and I think, okay, now you can see how it translates to a linebacker, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of that there too, and I think that that Rocky Boyman comp, I mean, that's a obviously it's a way back comp for Notre Dame fans will be very familiar with that, obviously,
Mhm.
because Rocky Boyman, fan favorite, everybody loves him. I mean, everybody loved the red hair, and he's
Yeah.
just a fiery guy. And I actually think just when you watch Zinter's game and you see like high motor kid, good athlete, probably faster than he even looks, really like that. I think makes sense. Another hybrid guy because Rocky Boyman used to go down and rush the passer, off the edge at times too. So I think that makes a total sense. And my recent and I always throw in a recent thing. When I put it in the FDL, I put it in that you mentioned that the comp was Boyman, but I also put in for like a recent guy. I always use another like college football guy too, Carter Coughlin, who was at Minnesota, who was like kind of like an undersized edge guy, really like recruited as a linebacker, ended up being an edge guy, and it's kind of what I see happening with Zinter. Well, I mean, we'll see. He's 6'3", 220 right now. To me, like he looks like all of 6'3" to me, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if he's 220 right now, like I have no problem seeing that he's going to be like a 240 guy. I don't know if he's going to ever, I don't see him being like a 260 guy. He doesn't look like he
Yeah.
has a frame. I haven't seen him in person, but that's just when I look at pictures of him when I see that. So I think, being a little bit of an undersized edge guy, and another guy I brought up in the film Don't Lie too was Kahanu Kia, who also was like an undersized edge
Yeah.
guy recruited as a linebacker, really kind of another guy played multiple positions, did a lot of different things. You could see fluidity, but then you could see him like blitz and rush off the edge. And there's a little bit of like Kia, a little bit of Maris Leofau, like that kind of guy. And I love those kind of players. Like those guys are pure football players. They're physical, they're fast, they play like, just out of 10 all the time, right? They're always out there. And that's the way I kind of see Zinter. So that's why I'm like such a big fan of this pickup.
Yeah, and just kind of build off the point you just made is like, and it goes back to the playing both ways thing, like student of the sport, right? Like I love guys who you can just kind of tell they're always watching the game, whereas like he's got to learn, like he has to learn how to run routes, right? You learn how to run routes, so you're going to watch tape of wide receivers and tight ends and that sort of thing, like learning how to get open and finding space with the ball. And I think it's hard to kind of put a value on that sort of thing. Like this is where it shows up, right? Like on tape or something like that. But since I've been around the game to where I was a player like that myself, and I was around other players too who were kind of like football geeks, right? And they were always the ones, like we would talk about like football IQ and we talk about football instincts, like that is manifested through being a student of the sport and playing multiple positions. And another player who I thought of in this way, it's like you could tell um from last year's class was Mitchell Evans, where it's
Yeah.
like he's playing quarterback, right? And he has to, they're giving him the ball, and it's like he wasn't really passing, but like he was running the ball, and he has jukes, right? So you can see where Mitchell Evans is going to play above whatever his rating was because he has those skills that maybe other players don't have, that might be, might have been more physical developed out of high school, where it's like, oh, they're playing a ton more tight end. So we know kind of how like that projects. And someone like Mitchell Evans is, um, a bit of a wild card. And I think that Zinter is kind of the same way, where he plays a ton of offense and he plays kind of all over the field on defense. So it's like he's not as highly rated as some other people because it's harder to project that, right? And plus he's from where he plays in the Northeast, right? So
Yeah.
it's hard to get ranked there anyway, just generally speaking, unless you're, testing off the charts or something like that, or you're going to a ton of
He needs
camps
to
and
go
everything.
to camp and then he needs to show out, and that's kind of how it needs to go.
Right.
Um, but I mean, the one thing too is that, like, and obviously Christian McCollum, who we work with at Irish Sports Daily, he's from the New England area too, and that is like that's like a I don't know if it's because of the Patriots or whatever, and obviously it's been like 20 years, so a lot of kids like grow up being football fans or whatever, but that area has blown up in like especially like I would say the last like 4 or 5 recruiting cycles,
Yeah.
where a lot of like private school kids that play, and you look at I mean the competition isn't great, right? It's not great, but I mean there's always studs there. There's always guys who physically look the part, who like whether they can run, just size, whatever, right? Like, and obviously Ty Chan was a guy that they just got out of there, right? And that's just that's like an example of kind of what there's guys of that level who are just going up. And that's the one thing with Tai Chan is that you're like, oh, well, how's he going to measure up? But you like, it's undeniable when you look at his size and his movement and all that. And I think obviously this is much different. Here's a perfect example. His brother was a 3-star offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Not, I had a Notre Dame offer, went to Michigan, but not like a guy who was like, I mean, certainly not super hyped up. He's been a very, very good player at Michigan, and probably Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame's doing pretty good on the offensive line, but I'm sure they take him now. Like
Right.
he's been a very, very good player for them. So, I mean, when you look at that too, that doesn't hurt, right? When he's got the kind of the pedigree as well, right? So, okay, so I gave him a grade of 90. He's a four star, so a low 4-star kid. Like technically, he's got the lowest grade in the class, but that's more of just like the product of like that's where the class is, and it's just a really really strong class. We'll kind of get into that a little bit later. Let's get into him and like the film and some clips of him and kind of like what we see here. So here he is. Yeah, obviously, thank you, Huddle, for I mean, I love these Huddle arrows that they put out, right? But this one, I mean, this is just a play where avoids the cut and knocks the ball down, and it's just like just great job of like avoiding the cut and then knock it and then playing the ball in the air, right? And like obviously attacking the arm of the quarterback. You're not going to get there.
It's just the length here too.
Yeah.
Like you just see, like he's such a big, like long arms. It's just like the quarterback has nowhere to throw it.
And I mean, I'm just gonna tell you, as somebody who like played that spot too, like that is not a smooth transition to play the cut and then like hop over it and do it. Most guys, it's like
Right.
I'm trying not to get like my ankle broken here, so I'm just being careful. And to him, it was like, I mean, it wasn't like the best cut block in the world, but it wasn't a bad one. And he ended up like just kind of going over it smooth. And that's something like that. I mean, that's impressive. That's definitely
Yeah.
impressive.
And he's here on this one. The arrow is short, but he's
Yeah.
right
So
here.
once again, stand up off the edge on the ball, similar to like a Viper,
Of
right?
similar to what Foskey was doing.
Yeah. And, you see him dip, get around the edge, turn the corner, right? And that's the main
Yeah.
thing. That's the main thing. And to me, he's not like hands wise. I mean, he's got work to do. That's most kids do, right? When they get to whatever. But I want to see, can you dip? Can you bend? Can you turn the corner? Because if you can't do that, then I mean, you're not going to hit home very often.
Right.
And that's the main thing.
This one, he's coming around the edge again.
Yeah, and this one he's a little bit off because I think he was supposed to jam the tight end. The tight end was a little bit late getting off here.
Right.
And this one, I wanted to highlight this, and it's more just motor. Like
Right.
this kid just plays hard, and I don't know how many like if you look at too, and Foskey too with this year, and that's something that probably Foskey probably doesn't get enough credit for, is he had like 2 or 3 sacks this year where it's just like he's chasing guys down, right? And it's motor because you're not always going to win clean, right? You're not always going to win clean, and you're not always going to beat your guy clean, and you're maybe not going to have the greatest get off. Like maybe just something was going on, you were communicating something, you didn't get off on the snap like you should have, but just continues to chase down. Like that's like 4 or 5 seconds after. That's like perfect, right? And coverage is doing its job, and then all you got to do is you got to keep working, and finish, and that's what he does.
And there's this like the explosiveness to finish too is the thing. It's like you're chasing, but if you're not a good enough athlete to
reacting to the quarterback,
like you're moving all over the place, you're changing direction, and you're running him down. It's like that just kind of goes to show like the kid is phenomenal athlete. He's here, on the goal line.
Yeah, and this play, I mean, I love it, and obviously there's a bunch of clips of him where you see him like strike and shed and make a play on the ball. And this one, I just think is just like that's a lineman that they put in the game to do that. And look at him like snap that kid's neck back on contact and shed and make the tackle, right? And obviously everybody else is in there too. But like that's big time impressive. And that's the one thing you see, especially with a guy who's like 6'3", 220, and you're thinking like a lot of these edge guys, you
We can
watch the
bully him.
clips. Yeah, and you watch the clips, and I mean, obviously, the most important thing you want to see is pass rush, and you want
Yeah.
to see twitch, and you want to see motor, and you want to see all that kind of stuff, obviously, right? But
Mhm.
at the same time, like you got to be able to play the run, you got to be able to set the edge, you got to be able to do all these things. You got to be strong at the point of attack, and he's a physical kid to be able to do that, and like and especially too when we talk about competition, or like that wasn't him taking on a 160-pound fullback like you see on some of these kids' tapes or whatever, right?
Right.
Like that kid probably weighed like 290 pounds and he just rocked him back. Yeah, like you said, bullied him. That's what was super impressive to me.
Yep. And here he is, last one off the edge here.
Yeah, and a 3-point stance. This was as a sophomore,
Yes.
and I just wanted to show it because it was a 3-point stance one, and I mean, obviously, just that when you see
Wrecks him. Yeah.
get off, and just like honestly, the push pull, embarrasses number 70 there, and just right there, and just finish and just clean, and like before the quarterback even knows it, right?
Yeah.
And
And
that's
it's just
exactly what
like
you want.
not a blind side.
Yeah, and you know what? And we didn't show you the clips from offense and some of the stuff where you see the other side of physical stuff where you see him blocking, some of the stuff where you see like, making yards after the catch and stuff. You see him running and you see him moving and ball skills and all that stuff. And there's like, there's like plays where he's like, he gets a pick where he's playing off the ball and all this kind of stuff too. So there's other stuff there that shows that you could say, well, I could see how this guy could project to be like a Mike Backer, right?
Yeah.
Like I could see that, right? But I mean, when you see some of the stuff you see on film there, I just think I'm like, this kid looks like an edge to me. Like he looks like he's a perfect viper, especially because he's a hybrid and he can't, so he could be able to drop and do some of those things, some of those responsibilities that, they would ask Plosky and Justin Adderall and Jordan Battello to do. So that's the way I see it. Like, do you see him in a similar way? You think, because I think long term, I don't know if he's gonna start out there, but I think long term that's gonna be his home.
Yeah, and there's a versatility there too. Like, they do a lot of like with the dollar stuff, right? Like they put Foskey off the line, right? And so they've got him in like that linebacker role, right? And Oski, obviously Foskey isn't recruited to play, wasn't recruited to play that sort of position. But he did play it, and he's okay at it, right? It's not like he's terrible, but like his value is in rushing the passer, right? And so I think someone like Zinter, his value, like yes, rushing the passer, but also like more comfortable playing off the ball in that kind of a situation where I don't need to be rushing or on the line of scrimmage with my hand down or in a 2-point stance or anything like that. So that's where his value comes from. I mean, it's similar to like Josh Burnham in that way, where it's like they both kind of have that versatility, right? Like he's 220 now. Does he have to? Like, could he get to 235, 240? Yes, he could. Doesn't have to. Probably. I mean, when you have long arms like that, you can put on a lot of muscle, gain weight without without feeling like, wow, like he's really thickened up, right? Like you don't want to lose that kind of athleticism, and I don't think you need to. And that's the value of having someone with long arms. So I could see a situation where it's like, yeah, let's get him on the edge, let's get him outside, and let's go. I mean, that was Rocky Boyman's main thing, right? But when you have someone like Keon Keeley in the class, like that's a guy who, let's definitely get him on the edge. You know what I mean? So like that's where it's like you take someone like Zinter and you can say, okay, let's keep you at 230, right? Let's keep you somewhere around 230, in between 230, 235. It's like, man, let's make you like a big Will or something like that. Athletic enough, long enough to where he could be the overhang player in a dollar situation, right? Where it's like that's where someone like JD Bertrand might be a little bit limited because he doesn't have the length, right? He doesn't have that physical kind of imposing body to where he can hold up either coming up from that dollar spot, that overhang player spot, and he doesn't have the athleticism or the length to kind of play, that middle spot when they drop him back. So, I mean, when you have someone like Zinter and Burnham, who are super versatile, they can do a lot of things, very good athletes, right? So just get me more of these guys who can run, who are very good at, like, Burnham, it was an offensive player as well. Like, give me more of these guys who just, like, they have those big bodies, those long bodies, long strides and everything.
Probably going to be a really good special teams player too.
Right. Exactly.
And it's interesting too when you're talking about like, kind of playing that off the ball, kind of like with the Viper and what they did there too, because I think there's like a little bit of them where I could see him being an inside linebacker, like some of the stuff that Freeman did at Cincinnati with their linebackers, where they had someone like, some years they had like bigger guys who were like 240, 245, and those guys would mug up on the guards. And I could see Zinter kind of like being able to do that and do that and like be effective with it. And obviously he's like an athlete that I think could do more than that, but he could also do that too. So, like you said, I think versatility is a big, big thing. And the way that I always liked when Brian Kelly, when he first came and he talked about big skill,
I was
right?
just
Big
thinking
skill.
that. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I love that term, big skill. And to me, that's Zinter. He's a
It
big
was like
skill
that
guy.
number 13, Van Fossen for Cincinnati.
Yes.
I feel like they're very similar players, and he
Yeah.
was a
He's
playmaker
another
for
big
them.
skill guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
Um,
that's kind of how I see that playing out.
So, with the class right now, it's a pretty darn good defensive class already. Like they're in a good spot. Let's just say he's going to be linebacker. He's going to play a linebacker.
Mhm.
Even if maybe think long term he's going to be edge. I mean, obviously they really can kind of like go big game hunting the rest of the way, how everything's kind of set up. But also at the same time, where they might be able to take like um, I think one of the things with like Mike Elston on the defensive line where he took like maybe too many projects in the same class, and they're not going to have that situation at all this year. But if they want to take a guy who's like a project later on, they're going to probably have that luxury because they're landing enough blue chip guys before that. So let's kind of like look at the class as a whole, and they got, on secondary right now they got Peyton Bowen, Adon Schuler at safety, Justin Red at corner. Obviously you got to see how things kind of go with corner, but we'll see what's going on with Christian Gray and if they can close that. Obviously, he's been to campus many times. There's still like some names out there. Safety, are they going to add another one? We'll see. But they're off a pretty good start in the secondary. Drake Bowman, obviously, a linebacker with him and Zinter in the class. I mean, that's a pretty good set of linebackers, but I would say they're still going to be on some of these other like elite guys, even though they took 4. I don't think they're going to take like 3 would be tops.
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't.
because you took 4 in the last class.
Yeah, I agree, and because don't spend your capital, I guess. Like, you
Yeah.
spend all your time on like the next one person,
Yeah.
right? And who is like, so I get. Oh, here's a question for you, right? So you have Zinner. Do you think that limits? I don't want to say limits. Do you think that changes the calculus of how they view someone like Samuel Mpemba?
Oh,
Because
that's an interesting question.
it's kind of the same skill set, right? It's kind of the same. Pemba is obviously like a much higher rated player, but it's
I
like they
really like
do.
Mpemba.
I I like him too, but
Yeah.
like you do have the same kind of skill set. So like I wonder, how does, like, we have our view of Zinter and what his skill set is and how he kind of projects, but like in Pemba, I feel like they're similar players. And
Mpemba is
then
going to be interesting because I think he's a Viper too. And I think
yeah,
I think they're recruiting him as kind of like a rover type. And he does some of that. But I don't know. I mean, to me, he's just so talented that you just take him. anyway. So it's just like it doesn't even matter. Like it's like even if there's a redundancy, you still
Yeah.
just take him. He's one of those guys. So it's like um Anthony Lucas in this last class. Not that there was anyone similar to him, but it's like they weren't sure if they're going to take another defensive end of the class. It's like, well, Anthony Lucas wants to come. Well, come
Right.
on down because he's a
Yeah.
stud. Like so there's just certain guys that I think you have to kind of make exceptions for. So and Pemba, I think no matter where you project him, you take him and you find room for him. And to me, it's going to be really interesting because, I mean, look at how, and I mean, we didn't even mention Keon Keeley and Brennan Vernon up front for them in the class. And obviously, you know what? People are coming after Keeley. They're coming after Bowen. They're probably going to come after these other guys too. Like who knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen in the class? Let's assume that they're all going to stay in the class. But if they stay in the class as is, I mean, the foundation they've kind of set here, this has a chance to be like probably the best defensive class they signed in a really, really long time. They signed a really good one in the previous class. So this is going to it looks like it's going to be kind of like way above that class. So, um, and it's going to be interesting because you look at where they were at, like, say, linebacker in the last class where they took 4 and they weren't like necessarily turning guys away. Maybe like Sebastian Cheeks, whatever, was a guy who probably would have come. I definitely think Lander Barton was a guy that
Right.
liked Notre Dame a lot. I mean, it's probably too much to say that like they were going to end up with him at that point in time. But like, I mean, if those guys were in the class, everyone would have been happy. They're very good prospects, right? So, but you can't take 6 linebackers, right? So there comes a certain point, and there's going to come like a point there at some of these positions for Notre Dame again. At the same time, I think like you're going to get like how Texas A&M this year, and I'm not saying they're going to sign a Texas A&M #1 rated class like that,
Yeah.
but how they did with the defensive line, I think they got like 6 guys that are like top 50 guys that are like defensive linemen. And what are they going to say no to like, you just got to take them. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry if 3 of the guys transfer. Well, so what? That means the other 3 are studs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just deal with it. Right. So I think you have to kind of be aggressive and I think you got to take like at least 25 guys in a class now, just with the portal and all that too. And because they kind of took like a little bit of a small class, like obviously on offense, like, I mean, quarterback, receiver, super, super important. You obviously need your quarterback and you need the numbers and quality at receiver.
Right.
But really, like, they're going to get at least 2. They're probably going to sign 3 offensive linemen. But like, you could be fine with 2. You signed 5 in the previous class and the 5 in the one before. So you'd be okay with that. So, I mean, I almost think it's like you don't want to cut numbers on the offense, but it's like if enough guys come and they keep recruiting like this, I kind of think they kind of gonna keep adding. And I don't know what the cutoff point is.
I mean, I have a pretty staunch philosophy, like take everyone and figure it out later. Like it's like that's
I'm
kind of
with
how
you.
I
I'm
am.
with
Like
you.
I don't like I don't I just but I know I don't know. It's hard because Notre Dame. We're conditioned to think of recruiting the way that they have in the last, I don't know, 12 years, right? Because of so like the previous staff, the way they thought about things, like they would move on. Especially at Viper, right? Like I would they would just move on and they would just be done. I don't know but then again, like I don't know that they would really have like a big chance at someone like Impemba. So it's like it's a problem that solves itself, right? Like
they weren't
like
in a lot of battles where it
you
was
don't have
them
this
and
dilemma.
Alabama for somebody. They weren't in a lot
Yeah.
of those battles.
Yeah.
No.
So I don't know. I think that you always want to, like you said, you take the best guys you can, but you want to build that momentum too. Because like look, they have like let's look at safety, right? Like you have Peyton Bowen, who everybody likes, and you have a Don Schuler who is people are starting to be like, okay, this guy's actually really good too. So you have that. go after Caleb Downs, like go
Oh yeah,
get
yeah.
him.
You go.
Because
You keep.
he's
Yeah,
you go
he's a
after
difference
him.
maker. Yeah,
Yeah, like you act like you have no safeties in the class. Like
yeah,
go get that guy.
yeah,
And like you're in a battle for Christian Gray right now that maybe they didn't expect, a month ago. But at the same time, like that's a top 150 player. Go after him, right? You have Rhett, you have you're in it with Malik Muhammad, right? Like these are, I mean, you talk about like the how good this class could be. I mean, Zinter could be like the lowest rated player in the class,
yeah. And he's a
and he's,
4-star
he's
kid.
a 4-star player. I mean, and it's like that's the type of quality you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Says nothing of Zinter.
yeah,
It's just like that. That's kind of where they're going with it.
yeah.
So
I just really think that um and obviously we're getting a little bit, we're going to a little bit big picture, but that was kind of like the whole point, is that like
right,
this is kind of setting it up, and it's just kind of like another domino into it. And um I guess like the whole point is that Notre Dame's defensive class is really good. I think it's going to continue to get better, and Preston Zinter I think has a chance to be like a really good piece going forward for Notre Dame. And it's always impossible to project how guys are going to exactly be, but I definitely think he has the potential to be like a high quality starter for Notre Dame and develop into that kind of guy for Notre Dame. Um, and I think we're both really high on his versatility and kind of what he kind of brings to the table there. And I just think, like, to me, he's a kid with a high floor. Like he's going to
yeah,
be he's going to be a quality player. Like kind of like how if you said, "Oh, well, he was like Bo Bauer at the very least," or something like that. I'm like, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. And Bo Bauer's been a pretty good player for Notre Dame, right? And I think, his ceiling is higher than that. So um uh you know, when I thought it was just going to be short, but went a little bit longer than expected. But that's how we do. We get excited about
you get
Notre Dame
excited
football.
about commitments and really
Yeah,
good players. So yeah,
yeah.
let's keep talking. Let's go.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully there'll be some more. I know spring ball's coming up in like just about a month. I think March 17th is the first practice, so there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up then. We're going to come back with some more like film stuff next week. I'm sure we'll have something cool for you then, and hopefully there's a couple more commitments before too. That would be pretty nice. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we get some 2024 momentum before you know it, because that's just, I mean, these guys are taking visits now, and it's just going to happen that way. And the weather is going to get a little bit nicer in South Bend, so that's going
Yeah.
to help too. So
Plus, we got the DC thing coming up.
yeah, definitely. So excited about that. So we'll end it here. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.